Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 7 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay or Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Mr. Ed Yardeni, and he joins us this morning. Ed, I got to go to you on Bitcoin at 93,000. How do you invest or speculate in something where there's no underlying, there's no profit, there's no free cash flow, there's no history of gold? How do you do that, Ed Yardeni?
I guess you just have to be a believer. It's kind of a faith asset. The view that there'll be more and more buyers of this particular asset just keeps driving it up. And I guess in terms of trading it, all you can really do is be a technical analyst. There's a little consolidation pattern there. Then Trump wins and it goes straight up. So, I think a lot of it's news dependent. And if the news is favorable, it goes up. That's kind of the story.
Ed Yardeni, America's turned upside down. Republicans, Democrats, Independents. So we're going from press release to press release, some thrilled, some not, etc. Ed Yardeni, how do you invest in this if you have a minimum time hold of 3 years? How do we emotionally get through the political maelstrom?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's pretty well known that the best way to invest is to ignore politics, or at least not let your personal political views influence your stock portfolio. Market tends to go up, whether it's Democrats or Republicans in the White House. I guess sometimes we have to be a little bit more specific about the extent to which they're also the same party that's in the White House is also in Congress. But all in all, the market it's PE times E. And as long as the earnings outlook is for more growth, and the longer is that outlook for growth, the higher the PE. And that's kind of the environment we're in right now.
So, Ed, how did your outlook on this market change, if at all, with the election last Tuesday?
More bullish, not for political reasons, but simply because I think animal spirits have been unleashed. Trump is definitely viewed as being a more pro-business president than Harris would have been. He wants to cut taxes again on corporations, as well as cut some taxes on lower income workers. He wants to deregulate. And then I think the market is also excited about the possibility that some of these intractable geopolitical crises might have a chance of getting resolved as kind of Trump does his deal-making magic, perhaps between Ukraine and Russia. And I don't think it's going to be deal-making in the Middle East. I think it's going to be sort of a free ticket for the Israelis to take out Iran.
Ed, are there any sectors that kind of jump out at you that might be particular beneficiaries of this new Republican-led government?
Well, I'm not too creative here. I'm still recommending the same sectors that we've been recommending for a while here. 3 out of 4 have worked, 1 hasn't, and the recommendation is to overweight technology, including communication services, kind of counting that as one sector. That's worked extremely well, and I think should continue to do well. So we'd overweight that. Yeah. Industrials has done very well. Financials, and the only clunker has been energy.
Ed Yardeni, give me a Mag 7 update. Dan Ives is in the house. He's been the acolyte of Apple forever, Planeteer forever. Take a sector view on Mag 7. Can you add shares here? Do you hold? Do you lighten up?
Well, I think lightening up hasn't been a wise thing to do. Though
Thank you for pointing that out.
Though everybody's scratching their head about why Warren Buffett's getting out of Apple.
Why is he getting out of Apple, Dr. Yardeni?
That's one of the great mysteries of life these days, is why he's scrambling to raise so much cash. And one of the interpretations is he knows something, or he thinks he knows something about things turning sour pretty quickly here, and he likes to buy things cheap. And it may simply be that, is that he just views that not only doesn't have anything to buy with the cash he had, But some of these assets that he have appreciated to such an extent that he just wants to roll it into cash. And the cash, by the way, is looking pretty good. It's still yielding 3.5 to 4.5%. So I think it's an inscrutable situation, and I can't, for the life of me, figure it out. I guess after the fact, if everything blows apart, we'll say that Warren Buffett was the only one who saw it coming.
There was a wonder child out of the Midwest pre-World War II, and he took some exams, Paul, out of the blue to get into Harvard without applying to Harvard. Harvard took him full scholarship, the whole thing, sterling career. And he ended up at a small school in New Haven. And James Tobin, even if you disagreed with him, was always this light of intellect and size. And he is the one in 1977 with James Meade who said nominal GDP matters. This was revolutionary at the time, to this day, hugely controversial. Ed Yardeni carries his spirit forward by looking at animal spirit, which in the definition of Bloomberg surveillance is real GDP plus inflation. Ed Yardeni, what would James Tobin say about the new animal spirit of a Trump administration?
Well, I think he would approve of the concept, though not necessarily the context in which it occurs. I mean, animal spirits was a phrase that was concocted by his hero, which is John Maynard Keynes. And John Maynard Keynes described it as spontaneous optimism. And I think Tobin was very much of a liberal and a Democrat, so I think he would prefer to describe animal spirits as occurring under a Democratic rather than a Republican administration. But he was objective, and it is what it is. I mean, we have seen so far spontaneous optimism, animal spirits, with the election of President Trump. Some of that may be that the election turned out to be not even close. It wasn't contested. So it was over with and done. But on the other hand, Trump's policies are good for nominal GDP for the most part, though there clearly are some potential negatives.
When you work with Eric Wallerstein on this and you get to the roaring 20s of Ed Yardeni, is it as simple as we underestimate revenue growth at American corporations?
Well, I'm not sure that the revenues is the issue. Revenues, I think, are going to be okay, but revenues are generated on a global basis. And while the U.S. economy looks pretty good, actually stands out compared to the rest of the world, China, Europe, some of these other areas look pretty weak. It's really all about earnings. The profit margin is going to automatically go up when Trump, I think one of the first things he'll do is get through Congress a cut of the corporate tax rate from 21% to 15%. And then deregulation is a known unknown. We don't know how much of it will occur and how much will be reflected in profit margins. But, oh, by the way, before the election, we were still talking about the roaring 2020s, figuring that productivity is going to make a comeback no matter who's in the White House.
Ed, is inflation a concern here? I think some folks are concerned that tariffs, number one. Number two, cuts in tax rates could fuel inflation. Is that a concern of yours?
Well, I think on balance, when you include the potential for deregulation and tax cuts, that may be sort of a wash. But yeah, I have to be concerned about it. We all have to be concerned about it. The bond market's certainly concerned about it. My friends, the bond vigilantes, have taken the bond yield up by about 70, 75 basis points since the Fed cut the Fed funds rate by 75 basis points. So somebody's wrong here. And the bond market's basically saying no mas. We don't need any rate cuts because the economy is doing well, and the so-called neutral rate is higher than Fed officials believe, as evidenced by the strength of the economy.
So, Ed, what do you think the Fed will do, and what do you think the Fed maybe should do?
The Fed should do nothing, which is what they should have done last week, but they just won't listen to me. I don't know why.
Damn, what is that about?
They've got their own agenda, and look, ever since Jackson Hole's the speech that Powell gave was extraordinarily dovish. It was almost wokish, reminiscent of the kind of focus just on unemployment that we had before the inflation surge of 2022 and 2023. Right. So I think we are seeing some stickiness in the inflation rate, the so-called super core inflation rate that not too long ago Powell said was a key number. Suddenly is ignoring that.
Ed Yardeni, we got to get it on the record. You've just been, without question, the equity strategist of the last 24 months. I got futures at 6,022. Remind us, Ed Yardeni, where we are with your 7% growth rate in 1, 3, dare I say, in 10 years. Mm-hmm.
Well, when Trump was elected, we thought about it. We thought about the animal spirits and what could happen to earnings as a result of the profit margin, and we turned more bullish. The reality is we haven't been bullish enough, and we've been among the most bullish. But so now we're looking for 6,100 by the end of the year on the S&P 500. That's almost a layup, and then I think we're looking for 7,000 by the end of next year, and 8,000 by the end of 2026, and 8 to 10,000 by the end of the decade, probably closer to 10 than to 8. Right.
I want you to fold this, folks, of Dr. Yardeni with Dr. Manel yesterday, to have Alicia Manel on yesterday on the failure of our retirement plan. And yeah, we got to put more money aside, but mostly what we have to do is listen to Ed Yardeni. If you're scared stiff, you're in cash, you're in bonds, maybe you can get the confidence of Yardeni by looking at 3 years and 5 years carefully to the kind of vector, the kind of glide path he sees. Ed Yardeni, thank you.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Or watch us live on YouTube.
Danny Blanchflower with us from Dartmouth. 30 years. The Wage Curve was his book. It changed the discussion of aggregation. Do you sum everything together, or do you have the courage to disaggregate? Like Blanchflower is saying, how does the fact that people can migrate from New Mexico to New Hampshire change our economics? David Blanchflower, John Edwards stood on a lawn in Louisiana and he said there's two Americas. This political election we just had, what does it say about two Americas, our disaggregation?
Well, what a great question, Tom. I mean, I think the question going forward is whether people are going to be able to deliver on what they say they plan to do, and whether the people who voted for things are going to get what they expect. And I think the answer to that is it's pretty darned unlikely. I mean, we're going to talk a bit about tariffs. We're also going to talk about inflation and unemployment. And I worked on this, Tom, with the sort of analysis that I did, and the evidence there was that people really didn't like unemployment. Roughly a 1 percentage point rise in unemployment was 5 times worse than a 1 percentage point rise in inflation. Well, that turns out to be wrong. And I think the way I would think of it is, I never really expected to be saying this, people seem to really not like inflation. So if that's what you really don't like, then it must mean that you really prefer unemployment. And so we have this great dilemma. Well, okay, if inflation's bad, then there's ways we can get rid of it. The ways we can get rid of it is to raise interest rates and to generate unemployment, and that will get inflation down. So I think that's really interesting. The other thing which is kind of interesting, I think, as an old-time central banker, is that inflation is not what people are really focused on. They've actually focused on price levels. So price levels are the big deal. Right. Even though you started to talk about inflation being relatively low, the way I always think of it, prices are 100 in year one, they go to 110, inflation's 10%, and then in the next year it goes to 110, inflation's 0. But everybody's hung up. So we're really in a world where essentially people, I don't think, express things in quite the way they think the consequences that are coming. And if you impose tariffs, we'll talk about that too. So this is a world of, oh my goodness me, I didn't really understand this. But if you voted for this, then there's going to be consequences.
Well, let's do this.
They don't like the consequences.
Paul wants to get to tariffs with Danny Blanchflower. Yeah. The book, folks, More Accessible, is not working. Where have all the good jobs gone? That's the heart of Blanchflower's
that really
recent.
Is the heart of it, Paul.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, that you go back to the heart of it, I think, is where have all the good-paying jobs gone? And in a sense, I think what you see is a big bunch of America says, right, we have not been doing well. We've had inflation rising. Right. We have our pace not kept pace with it, and it's a shout and a cry for help. But obviously there are issues we've heard people talk about. Oh well, we'll abolish Obamacare and we'll go after Social Security and we'll go after Medicaid and all kinds of things. How any of that is actually intended to help the well-being of the working man and woman it's a part. I mean, these are all
Danny, let's get Paul Sweeney in here because he understands that Harvard beat Dartmouth in football.
Exactly.
Paul?
Hey, Danny,
I know, but we beat Princeton last week.
Danny, just for our listeners, for our viewers, Danny, tariffs. Can you give us your 3 cents on tariffs? What do they do? What do they not do?
Well, my good pal, who's in the office 2 doors from me, Doug Irwin, taught me most of what I know, and I think will taught Tom most of what he knows too. I mean, the story I always had in my head was that free trade's a really good idea. I mean, I come from the UK, as you gather, and obviously I've seen Brexit. Brexit was essentially free trade between a big group of countries with a barrier outside it, and the UK voted, which I think is the worst economic suicide note ever written, to go to Brexit. And what we're going to see here is essentially, if this happens, we're going to see tariffs. And what tariffs do is it generates winners and it generates losers. So winners would be those who see suddenly the price of goods rising. And so there are rents to share. So imagine if you raise the price of cars, then the unions say, well, this is great because I can raise my wages because the price of cars have risen and I'm going to do really well. So the people for whom prices rise, they're going to do well. But for the consumer, prices will rise and that will hurt them. And the big question, and I think we should talk a little bit about, is, well, first, what are other countries going to do? Is Mexico going to retaliate? Is China going to retaliate? And then second, well, can you go to substitute? So I've been through 3 hurricanes in the last 3 years, 2.5 years. And one of the big things I recall was that, tariffs rose on aluminum. Well, what happened? Well, nobody's buying aluminum windows anymore. They all buy acrylic, right? So the question is, can you substitute from those things? And in the long run, is there going to be import substitution where you end up making your own stuff? But this is such a long run process that this is chaos.
Danny, I got to get one more question in here before you go off to fight with Irwin today. Are we entering, even though we don't know it, just a further monopsony where there's a power of big business, a power of big corporations, a power of the rich guys with this election?
Well, it certainly seems that way. I mean, I gather Elon Musk has moved into Mar-a-Lago. I mean, it certainly seems that way. But I do think that, in a sense, the lesson I would draw in some ways from the UK, and the lesson I draw from Liz Truss, is that actually, yes, that may be true, but markets do stop people doing stupid stuff. So think about Liz Truss passes a set of stuff on the Friday and basically is done on Monday. So markets will respond to things. People will respond. So yes, that there's going to be one heck of a set of conflict and chaos going on. Right. But I agree.
Danny,
it does look like
we got to go. We got to go, Danny. But I promise me, I want you to come on next Bank of England meeting to push against Catherine Mann trying to keep rates high in the United Kingdom. That's like Cardiff.
That will get me going.
That will get him going. That's like Cardiff taking on Man City. I mean, that's what we're talking about.
But I would always lose that game, so I would hope that he win this one.
Professor, thank you so much. Right? Danny Blanchflower with us from Dartmouth College there, just outstanding on the wage of America.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 7 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Wendy Schiller in red today of the Taubman Center, joining us, of course, professor of civics for all of America. Wendy, what a perfect time to talk to you about the heritage of Senate independence. John Thune is labeled a rhino, but talk to me, take me from, say, in the modern era, from Senator Byrd of West Virginia over to the senator from the Dakotas. How independent is Senate independence?
Well, Tom, the Senate has the capacity to be totally independent from the president and even, very independent from the House. But partisanship has enveloped our sort of separation of powers and our branches of government in the last 20 to 25 years, so that this institutional break between the president is elected separately. It's unlike most of the other industrialized countries of the world, where the majority party in the legislature chooses the prime minister who runs the country. So we have separation, and the partisanship has really shrunk that separation. So now, when you run for the House and when you run for the Senate, especially if you're Republican, you really have to swear an oath of allegiance to the presidential candidate and promise to carry out their agenda in a way that is really more pronounced than it's ever been before. Excuse me.
So, Professor, taking that as a backdrop here, how do you think about some of these cabinet appointments that we've seen from President-elect Trump here? It seems to be I guess one of the commonalities is loyalty, professed loyalty to President Trump. What do you make of some of his appointments?
Yeah, I mean, this is really, in a second term, you'd expect sort of a president to have made connections and replace the first set of cabinet people with a sort of more loyal group in a second term. That's not, something that's surprising. Up until yesterday, I was saying this looks like any other Republican administration, George W. Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush. These nominees would be fairly typical for anybody. So I found that a little bit surprising, given that Trump is not typical in any way. But, with Tulsi Gabbard and Matt Gaetz on the list, one to run the intelligence and one to run, be the nation's top law enforcement officer, that was surprising. And that sort of suggests to me that he's using that Justice Department nomination to really get back at people who investigated him. Right. We'll see if Matt Gaetz gets confirmed. He did resign from the House yesterday, so that's pretty big confidence that he's going to get confirmed. Will the Senate exercise its advice and consent? Right. Constitutional responsibility. That's the big question.
We'll get out the Brown University crystal ball here. I mean, Wendy Schiller, what are we going to observe? Are we going to have like Sam Ervin and Howard Baker in a smoke-filled Senate room, and Mr. Gaetz is going to sit there with X number of people lined up, Republicans and Democrats, and what do they do? Do they ask him questions? How does the process work? What will we visually see?
Well, Tom and Paul, I can tell you that I'm not sure you'll visually see anything. It really depends on how John Thune, who's now been elected as a Senate Republican leader, can withstand the Trump pressure to really adjourn and let him just do recess appointments, which would make these people sort of temporary until the end of the Congress in 2026. That Trump likes that. He likes a little bit of instability in his cabinet. So I don't know if the Senate can withstand that pressure. If they don't, they'll have very quick softball hearings in the first week after Trump is inaugurated, probably, and get these cabinet nominees, situated within just maybe a week or two. You will not see extended hearings. Trump will put too much pressure on Thune. And if Thune wants to maintain that constitutional prerogative in the face of that pressure, he'll have to act very quickly to confirm all of Trump's picks.
Paul wants to jump in here, but I got to ask this. So you're telling me within the maelstrom right now that Lieutenant Colonel Gabbard and Attorney Gaetz will go through a normal process?
Well, when I say normal, I don't mean a deep and thoughtful investigation and hearings, but I think that Thune, in order to maintain the Senate's bargaining power with the president at all, what's the point of being a senator if you're just going to sort of lay down and say, forget it, we're not going to do any of our constitutional responsibilities? It's not much fun. I can't imagine most senators want to act that way. But he will have to get these things through very quickly because Trump has a lot of momentum right now. And, each of these leaders in these Congresses, they depend on Trump. Mike Johnson, John Thune, if Trump really raises a ruckus, who knows if the Senate Republicans stay with Thune? So it's a very unstable time. So they have to appease the president and try to maintain their constitutional powers. We're going to see just how good John Thune is at that in the coming months.
Professor, are there checks and balances in this government here? We've got a Republican president, Senate, now House, and one could argue a Supreme Court. Are there viable checks and balances on this president?
The Madisonian checks and balances relies on the ambition of individuals in these institutions, the House, the Senate, the Supreme Court, to enjoy their power, to recognize that they have a role in the system, that their voice should be heard vis-a-vis the president. If partisanship wholly subsumes that and they abdicate that power, that responsibility, there will be literally no institutional checks and balances.
So is that a material risk here going forward over the next 4 years? How do you think about that? Because one could spin some crazy scenarios.
Yes. I mean, you could see an attempt to sort of unravel and undermine the sort of the institutional framework that we've been operating under for a long time. You could see that if there was coordination and agreement across all Trump cabinet people and Trump himself. But he is someone who is a little bit mercurial. He changes his mind a lot. And he's also, creating a team of rivals. I can't imagine that J.D. Vance is happy about either Marco Rubio or even Matt Gaetz being in the cabinet, right? These are competitors for 2028, theoretically. So there'll be competition and discord, as there always is. And Trump likes that. He foments that. He feeds off it. So right. Do I think it will be systematic in what they can do? No. Do I think there'll be some chaos? Yes.
Professor Schiller, I got one more question. It's an audible. George Will, with a brilliant essay in the Washington Post, whether you agree or disagree with him doesn't matter. He pulls out the history of Wendy Schiller like no one. George Will goes where I was a couple days ago, Professor Schiller, saying, you know what, 2028 is before the census of 2030. His numbers, his guesstimates on where the electoral votes are in 2030 is still a massive shift to the South. It's just unbelievable how the electoral votes build in Florida, Arizona, et cetera, at the expense of New York, Illinois, and California. Are we going to see that radical of an electoral shift 6 years out?
I think we've learned that elections in America are now very much about the candidates themselves. It's a choice between two alternatives. And we've seen an interesting candidate win now twice, who isn't typical. I don't know if we can make any assumptions about how people will vote until we know the choice set. Yeah. The idea that a Midwestern governor will be the choice and easily win, I think in 2032, I think you're pointing to a point that it's probably going to return to the South. But remember, Bill Clinton and Al Gore, quote unquote, saved the Democrats in 1992. So the Democrats themselves returned to the South to win the presidency not that long ago. So it won't be surprising if they have to do the same thing in 2032.
Wendy, I learned more from you in the last 4 minutes, 6 minutes, than all the hot air of the last 3 days on Senate confirmation. Just hugely valuable. Wendy Schiller, their definitive of Brown University and the Taubman Center.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 7 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.
Your daily look at the front pages, the Lisa Mateo Hour. Start strong, Lisa. What do you have?
All right. I'm probably going to get you in trouble for this, but a new place to take Mrs. Keene shopping. This is a temporary Louis Vuitton store. It's on Billionaires Row in Manhattan. Okay. Nice. The flagship store is across the street. They're getting renovated, so now they have this temporary store opening. But it's got the 50-foot ceilings. It has Le Cafe, where you can sit down for luxury snacking.
That's the biggest racket going.
You don't want the waffles with caviar for $48?
Are you serious?
Yes. I'm telling you, a cheeseburger, $32. It has a bar. It has a library space. So it's all there for you to just relax.
But this temporary store is going to be there for like a couple of years, right?
A couple of years, yes.
They're complete, folks. In New York City, it is iconic and this time of year special. 57th Street at 5th Avenue. Yep. And Lisa, to be clear, they're tearing down their corner store. Is that right?
They're renovating. It's going to take a couple of years.
And rebuilding it up.
And rebuilding it up. So now they're in the former Nike Nike used to be in that
Oh, I know where that is. Okay, very.
So they're
that's a
in
big
there now.
Tiffany was in there before, and they own Tiffany
Yes,
now.
correct. You are correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Tom's familiar with
So
that.
he knows very well.
Yeah, exactly.
But they'll still have the shopping, jewelry,
ready?
accessories, menswear, yes, women's wear.
I
They'll
learned
still have-
yesterday Van Cleef is taking a firm. That's the
Say what
modern
again?
Van
Van
Cleef is a thing with gold and,
Right.
and stones from Africa. I don't know what. It's jewelry I can't afford.
Okay.
And they're taking a firm, which shocked me in that European luxury's figuring out a firm and, all the rest of the stuff that everybody buys with today.
All right.
Can we move on?
We can. I hope Mrs. Keene was listening. Okay. We've been talking about, if you want to date someone, just go to a bar. What happened with
Right.
that whole thing, okay? A lot of
I'm
singles
shocked.
are taking that into consideration. The Wall Street Journal had this great insight into it. They're saying singles are forgetting the dating apps. They want to go out, but their skills are a little rusty. They don't know how to go out and talk to people. They don't know how to make eye contact. They think it's awkward. They say social norms around dating is not the same. People think it's creepy when you approach someone. And
But
they say
that
that
describes me from about 1971 on.
So they don't. They haven't developed the dating skills. Is that kind of what
they forgot. Like
Okay.
it's been so long,
All right.
and they had the dating apps, and they were just used to someone kind of picking it for them. So they're saying it's hard to go in a bar and make eye contact because everyone's on their phone and no one's paying attention. They're
The
just
phone's
on
a
their
big,
phone.
seriously,
Yeah,
the phone
yeah.
is a big deal.
Yes. So
Yeah.
they did have some advice. So here's the advice from the dating
All
coach,
right, go.
okay? You put away your phone, you remove your earbuds, you smile, and you say, I don't believe we've met yet.
Oh,
You like
that would work.
Did it work? No?
That would work.
That's what they're saying.
The kids
So
got to
I-
get back in the game.
I don't know.
I don't
I
believe
just-
we've met yet.
Yes, that's the best they've got.
Let's. Ken, is that how the Feliu family started? No, no, it is
I don't
not.
believe we've met
Another
yet.
bar story with our global technical director. Continue.
Big thing happening today, the last supermoon of the year, okay?
Saw that last night,
Hitting
yeah.
peak illumination. Yeah, you've already seen it because it's already started, to come out.
It's like
it came
full
before
moon today.
sunrise. Yes, correct. It came out this morning. It'll continue before a few hours, sunrise Sunday. But the biggest peak, if you want to see it, the biggest, the brightest, it's 4:29 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow. So keep that in your calendars. But full moon's in November. It's the beaver moon. And so why they call it the beaver moon, it's not exactly clear the origin, but it's actually because mid-fall is when the hunters set beaver traps before the swamps start to freeze over. That's where it came from.
Font of wisdom.
The beaver's more
dude?
active in November.
With full moons, do you see a bigger tide?
That's a great
Ooh,
question.
that is a
I don't
good
know.
question.
I don't know.
I
But
don't
I will be
notice it, but-
4:29 tomorrow. I will be at the
You will
Jersey
be at the
Shore.
beach.
I will be at the
You
beach.
will give us a
I'm getting
full
the early
report.
flight back from Boston tomorrow, so be back. At
You
the
have
beach.
the Gulf Stream?
Yes, I do. We'll be zipping
Are you
right into
going
Belmar
Middletown
Airport.
or Teterboro?
Belmar.
Belmar?
Yeah, that's
Jeez,
the local
at
airport by
least,
my place.
I
Not
just,
bad.
I can't even get on the Acela. I'm on the slow train tomorrow. I get back like 9 p.m. Next.
Okay, finally, Mark Zuckerberg teaming up with rapper T-Pain. It's a new version of a hit Lil Jon song, but he's not rapping, okay? But if you remember, back in 2002, Lil Jon, the East Side Boys, came out with Get Low. So here it is if you want to hear it from back in the day. All right. Okay, that was the original, 2002. But Mark Zuckerberg, he was a big fan of the song, okay? But when he first met his wife, Priscilla, it was playing 21 years ago. That's how they fell in love, apparently. So every year he plays it on their anniversary. But he wanted to do something different this year. So he teamed up with T-Pain to do a little remake. Take a listen. Okay, so he's not rapping, as you can tell, but he has the vocals. He's a little crooner. It has the raw lyrics. What I had to cut out. It was very hard to
Really?
edit. Yes,
Yeah.
It's very raw. It sounds beautiful, but his wife called it very romantic.
That was romantic.
Yes, she
what
said
we
it was
just
very
heard.
romantic.
I didn't know this. I'm glad you brought this up because Afterthoughts calling me T-Pain at home. And it's not. It's about the dishwasher and the unloading of said dishwasher. I'm T-Pain.
Mark Zuckerberg.
It's Tallahassee pain. That's
Is
where
it?
it comes from.
Okay.
Tallahassee.
I learned Lisa,
the knowledge.
Seriously, every time you come on, I learn something.
You're welcome.
It's great.
Florida State.
What was the line to pick up in a bar?
I don't believe we've met yet.
Lisa Mateo
yeah.
with the newspapers today. You can't do better than that. Lisa Mateo there, and of course we're from Boston, and we're on Lisa Mateo driving the show forward here.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast, available on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Listen live each weekday 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, TuneIn, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.